Hello and welcome. I'm Simona Stambazzi from Italy, and together with my friend and fellow storyteller Despina Ariou from Greece, we're the hosts of Tell Muses, a storytelling podcast from storytellers, for storytellers, with storytellers, all about the wonderful art of storytelling and all about stories. And who better to start and to have our first episode ever with than the wonderful, the one and only Liz Weir. Hello, Liz, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here with us and to be our first guest. We're very, very excited. Hello and welcome.
Good morning, ladies. How are you?
We're good. Very
Very
excited
well
to have you here.
in the not snowy Italy for Simona and Greece for me, in contrast to Northern Ireland from what I
No,
see, Liz,
very, very snowy here. Really deep snow outside. Yeah.
Christmassy.
Yeah.
It snowed yesterday here. I have
Yeah.
to say, it
Really?
snowed yesterday here in Italy. I'm pretty excited, but now nothing, of course.
Well, I have
Ladies, I
deep,
am
deep snow.
envious in any case.
We drove home. We had a storytelling event last night, and we were driving home at 10 o'clock. Deep, deep snow. It was very tricky. But storytellers get through. We had two English storytellers and one Moroccan storyteller in the car.
Wow. So, Liz, if it's okay with you, I would like to ask, who is Liz Weir?
Liz Weir is a storyteller and a writer based in County Antrim, Northern Ireland. She's been telling stories for 52 years, which means she's very old, 74 now, and still loves stories just as much as she did when she started.
Okay, just a small correction here. She's been telling stories for 52 years, which makes her so many years wise.
Yeah, I like to think so. I like to think so. But probably, as I always say to children, I've been telling stories all my life. All of us tell stories, but I've been telling stories as part of my job for 52 years.
Which was a librarian, if I remember
Yes,
correctly.
when I graduated, even before I graduated, then I did a postgraduate course in librarianship, and they told us we had to tell stories to children, and I was completely horrified. I'd never had anything to do with children. I've never told a story to anybody. I never did drama. I was a shy person, and that's what started it, I suppose. That's where I started.
But Northern
Really?
Ireland in general has a huge tradition in folk tales, right? I mean,
Yeah,
ever since I can remember, your lore is like it goes back centuries.
but I wouldn't say I grew up in a household where people told folk tales. They didn't.
Ah,
My mother was English, so she wouldn't know any Irish folk tales. My father was a Belfast man who joined the army at something like 19. And again, he wouldn't have had any background. He wasn't a man who read books. I didn't have any background in that. Fortunately, I loved reading, and my mother would have told me lots of stories and read me lots of fairy tales and things. But I wouldn't have grown up knowing about Finn McCool or Cuchulainn. You must understand in Ireland, I live in Northern Ireland. Um, if you are Catholic growing up in Ireland, you go to a Catholic school where there's a very strong ethos about Irish culture, Irish stories. I grew up Protestant, went to a state school. At that time, there was no emphasis on Irish culture. I learned British history. I learned about the kings of England. I learned about Henry VIII's wives. So I honestly can tell you there was no influence on me at that stage other than what I read. And it's only as I got older that I did. So I'm not one of these people that can say I'm fourth generation storyteller. No, I'm not. My mother was very good at telling stories. My father used to MC concerts. He was an entertainer. He sang a lovely tenor voice. He told jokes. So I grew up in a family where talk was really important, but I couldn't honestly say I grew up steeped in folk tales. And I want to make
mhm.
that point because some people think if they didn't have that background, they can't tell stories. Well, I've proven that different. you can learn everybody.
Either that or it's a stereotype that if you're Irish, you're a storyteller,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Well, I think if you're Irish, you do have we're very talkative. We do talk a lot. We value conversation. We value talk, you know.
I wanted to say, Liz, that this reminds me a lot of my own experience because I too didn't grow up in a storytelling community, a storytelling family, and my love for stories has started from books. And I wanted to ask you, how did your love for stories start? So you mentioned books, and you mentioned that then you later on became a librarian. So why stories? What was intriguing for you about
Well,
stories?
well, I love a good story. I love beginning and middle end. I love the satisfaction of reading a good story. But when I was asked to tell stories, we had to learn about children's literature. And that was the boom time. That was like the early 70s, 70, 71, 72. That was when wonderful picture books like The Very Hungry Caterpillar and some fantastic picture books. And when you read those books, you couldn't help but be inspired. When I first of all told, and the first story I ever told was The Three Billy Goats Gruff, which had been my favorite story as a child. And the children were so enthusiastic, they were hanging on every word. And any storyteller knows that gives you a buzz. You think, oh, they like me. They really like me. And that gives you more confidence. Now, if they all walk out, they don't like you. But if they're with you, there's no feeling in the world like that. And that gradually then I developed my confidence. I did mention at the beginning that I'm a shy person. I am still a shy person. I've had to learn to do what I do. And I tell that to people in workshops who say no. And I say, yeah. Um, I've had to learn to do that. And if I can do it, I can teach other people to do it. And that's what I think is a great benefit of storytelling, to help people's confidence develop. So I do that a lot with children, with teenagers, and of course with adults as well. So that's
And
really
you do teach other people how to do it, but we'll talk about that in a little while. Perhaps
sure.
you would like to share a story with us now?
Oh, a story. Well, we do the story that brought me through lockdown, I think. And I'm sure, Despina, you've heard it before, but it's a story about the farmer and his wife who lived near me here in the Glens of Antrim years ago. Everything was going wrong in their lives. Their cow wasn't giving milk, their hens weren't laying properly, their house was coming down around them, they needed paint. Everything was bad. They had very little money. And they were sitting in the middle of the day having just potatoes and milk. And an old tramp man walked in, a traveller, a man of the roads. And of course, they were generous people. They shared what they had. And over the meal, they told the old man about all the things that had gone wrong in their life. And as he stood up to go, he said, "Thank you for your kindness. Maybe I can help you." And they looked at this old man in his ragged clothes and they thought, can he do for us? But he gave them a chunk of gold, just a lump of gold. And with that, he was gone. And the farmer's wife said, "What are we going to do with this?" And her husband said, "Bury it there beside the fire, because in the old days, they had earthen floors where you could dig up and bury stuff." So they talked. Will we get a new cow? Oh, that cow's a good milker. We'll get more hens. No, those hens will come back. What about getting paint and wood? Oh, he says, "I have it. I just never got round to doing it." And they talked. And the wonderful thing in the story is you can say time passed. A whole year went past. And when the tramp came back again, a new rooster crowing, new calf in the field, place all painted. And this time the meal was meat and vegetables, potatoes, and they greeted him like a long lost friend. And they said, "Oh, it's great to see you." He said, "You're doing well." "Oh, all thanks to you, all thanks to you." Oh, he said, "What did you spend the gold on?" And they looked at each other and smiled and said, "To tell you the truth, we didn't spend it at all. It's still buried there where we left it. All we needed was a bit of a lift to boost our spirits, and that's what you did." And the old man said, "Do you mind if I take the gold with me? Because maybe the next place I go, somebody there will want a wee bit of a lift." And on he went. And that's how it is for all of us. Sometimes it's not somebody telling us how much money we can get or what wonderful gigs we can get. It's just somebody to provide a listening ear, or somebody saying, "Meet me for a cup of coffee," or somebody giving you a phone call. And that's why I love the story, which kept me through lockdown. It's called a wee lift.
That was awesome. So short and so to the point.
That's my
It's an
style of
excellent
storytelling.
story.
You won't get long,
Yeah.
rambling, descriptive stories with me. It's just not what I do, because I tell stories in so many different places. You need to be adaptable. You need to have tinies. Somebody says 5 minutes, give them 5 minutes. Somebody says 2 minutes. And that's a talent I think I like to see more storytellers possessing. I think it's really important. Years of experience have taught me that, but I think timekeeping is one of the most important things. We'll maybe look at that later. I think it's important. I've done a lot of radio, and radio, you can't be going on. They'll say, I mean, they asked me to do one of my favorite stories in a minute. And I went, what's a minute? But actually, I did the gist of it in a minute. And that may sound like sacrilege, but if you're given that opportunity, you take it. You don't say, no, I can't do that. You do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was in a workshop once, an online one with the Grampian storytellers from
Oh, yeah.
Scotland,
Still,
and there
yes.
was this workshop where we had to give a whole story. I don't remember how many seconds it was, whether it was a minute or more, like it was newspaper headlines.
Yeah, I love that.
Right? It was exercise, and indeed, not only for radio, as you said, but also when you're telling with other tellers and the time is limited, you must keep in mind that there's other people who have to, give their share.
We had a great discussion about that in the car yesterday. Zuhair is here from Morocco, and we were talking about when you're sharing a stage with other people and you're told you've each got 10 minutes. Well, if somebody else does 35, you're not going to get a chance to tell. One has to be very conscious of other people's time. And I've seen me in situations where somebody has eaten all my time and I maybe have 5 minutes. I'll either be a prima donna and throw my head up and say I can't do it, or I'd get on with it and I'd do it. And I do the 5 minutes, because nobody's going to thank you for not doing it.
Well, that means you're a professional on one hand. On the other hand, the people who know you would never see you as a prima donna, I'm sure.
Oh, I have my moments. But no, I think we're very privileged to do the work we do. But I think with that privilege comes responsibility. We have to give of our best. I think we have to work with other people. I mean, you know that I organize events and I book storytellers. I won't book storytellers purely because they're a good storyteller. I need to book storytellers who, one, are good storytellers, and two, can work with other people. Can't be just the
Indeed.
star of what I call the star of the big picture. Me, it's all about me. Won't happen. Won't happen.
Yeah, I
Anybody
think
that
this
I
is
book,
why we're not actors. It's a whole different thing. We're
that's right.
just channels.
Uh-huh. You're right.
And I've heard you tell many stories that have to do with your homeland. It will
Mhm.
be either stories about Ireland and its history, either more older one or more modern one, or it has to do with the land and the people.
Uh-huh.
Many of the stories have that theme, right?
In Ireland, we're very close to the land. We have a theme of the landscape. We're inspired by the land. We always say every stone can tell a story. I can take you to the castle where that happened. I can bring you to that place. And I think that's really very important. So I am very drawn to stories from my homeland. Now, that does not mean I don't tell stories from around the world. I do tell stories from around the world. And when I'm in a school, I was in a school the other day. We had children from Poland, with children from Syria, with children from Nigeria. So it's good that I talk and tell world folk tales as well. But for example, you'd mentioned a star story to me, and I got this lovely story, but it was a Native American story, an Indian story. And I thought, no, I don't feel it's culturally appropriate for me to share that story. I just didn't feel comfortable in sharing it. So I have to be very aware of the stories I tell, and I have to have a good feel for it. So
Yeah.
if I choose a story, I can't tell a story I don't like. I got a commission years ago from the festival at the Edge, and the theme was Forever Young. And I knew roughly what I wanted to do. It was the anniversary of the First World War. And I knew roughly I want to do this created story and a historical story and weave a folk tale into it. And here, this is actually quite a funny story. And I found this Romanian story about life everlasting and world without end. And it was a good story. And I told it a few times, but my heart wasn't in it. And I thought, no, I can't tell that story. no, I can't. It's a good story. It fits the thing. So I had 3 days to find a story because my musician was coming to work on the music with me, Kieran Mulholland, a fantastic fiddle player. And I had the other two bits of the story. And I took a shelf full of books. This is the truth. A shelf full of books from here, from my house. And I went to this retreat center where I was staying. And when I went in, I dropped the books. And this book opened. And I looked down and picked it up. And there was this story about the Queen of the Lonely Isle, it's called. I'm being joined by a cat. Queen of the Lonely Isle. And it was perfect. It was perfect. And that's the story I used. So sometimes fate plays a part in my storytelling. So never underestimate the power of fate. You would know that from being Greek. The fates are very
Well,
important.
indeed, and more than that, globally, on a global level, I think this is the magic of stories. So for people who are listening but cannot see, I should tell you that we are able to have a glimpse of a ginger tail currently. So I do have a question, but Simone, is there anything you would like to ask before I go on to the next question?
We just wanted to say that that's why we say that stories find the storyteller and not the other way around.
Absolutely
So,
true. Absolutely true.
so story needs to
One of the
reason
things,
with you.
yeah. One of the things about Zoom that I don't care for that much. I love Zoom and we can talk about that. But sometimes you tell a story and before the story is even out of your mouth, somebody sends you a message, where'd you get that story? I'd love to tell that story. And I'm like, hold on. It took me time to find that story, to work on that story, to develop that story, you know. Sometimes people just want to suck the story out like a vampire without
Okay.
doing any work on the story or understanding the story. I mean, as you probably know, you two, that I'm very happy for people to ask me about stories. I'm happy to pass on stories. I'm a librarian by profession originally. That's what I do. But it's just not the same when somebody just says, gimme, gimme, gimme. You know, that attitude. And I'm sure you've both seen that.
Yeah, it's happened. On the other hand, when people ask for permission,
Yes.
you
And
know,
and
it's
talk
always
about it.
nice, it's
Yes.
kind indeed. And especially people who you know are going to work on the story on their own. They're not
Exactly.
just going
They're
to
not
take
just
it and
going to,
repeat it
yeah,
word for word.
exactly.
So the new versions come out, and this has been going on since time immemorial. This is how we have different
Yeah,
versions of the same stories with people traveling and sharing, etc.
exactly.
So my next question, Liz, is you said you teach people how to do storytelling, and I think you do that through NOCN, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Is that so?
Yes. Well, different things. I mean, I do one-off workshops where, you know, for a day I'll have a group of people, maybe beginners who want to learn to tell stories. But we have been very lucky. I work for the Armstrong Storytelling Trust, which is a charity dedicated to encouraging storytelling throughout Northern Ireland. But I'm also a proud member of the Committee of Storytellers of Ireland, our national organisation. And we were very lucky to get a large amount of funding from a group called the International Fund for Ireland. And over the last year and a half, that's paid for 4 storytelling courses with 12 people in each. And it's called the Open College Network. It's a national organization that gives you an accreditation in oral storytelling. So I co-teach with a great storyteller called Stephen O'Hara, and we have taken 4 lots of 12 people through this course. So, and for every 12, I'll be honest with you and say for every 12, maybe in each 12, you get 4 people who want to take storytelling on and want to do storytelling. The others are maybe doing it out of interest for their jobs, but they don't want to be professional storytellers. But from the courses I've taught over the years with people that you may have heard of, Colin Irwin did the course, Stephen O'Hara himself, Masco Carey, Denise Weir, like a lot of Irish storytellers who are working now as storytellers would have done that course with me. And it's so lovely to see how they've taken what they've learned and they've gone on to develop careers out of it. So it makes me very proud.
Plus, I had the opportunity when I visited Liz last year to have a listen to be part of the audience of 2 of her students who gave their first gig. And
Yeah.
it was not only oral storytelling, it was also music, it was part jokes, it was very familiar and very entertaining, I think, for everybody involved. And
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't know, if I didn't know beforehand, Liz, if you hadn't told me, I wouldn't guess it was their first
I
gig.
know. Well, actually, there's a thing now I must tell you, and I'll send you the link. That part of the money we got for the from the International Fund for Ireland, we've got the money to produce 11 videos of storytellers telling in the landscape, and all 9 of the 11 are new storytellers, and the quality is superb. It's really, really good. So I'll send you the link afterwards, so that people, your listeners, can actually click on. They're on the Storytellers of Ireland YouTube site. It's called Land of Lore, and they're really good. I'm very proud of them all. That was part of, you do a course, you just don't want to do the course and then it ends. So two things. One, we did these videos so they're there, people can hear them and see them. And two, now we've just heard we've got more money for next year. We're going to do another course, but there's no point in keeping on just training people with no outlet. So we're going to set up 4 new storytelling clubs with funding to pay the guest storytellers and funding to pay the hosts, because I believe in developing audiences, developing places for storytelling, because this has come up in Fest and other organisations. There's no point in keeping on training young storytellers and nowhere for them to tell. So we're creating places for them to be able to tell every month, like 12 in the year. So that's quite good.
Yeah, that's awesome, actually, because, a lot of people have storytelling schools and the like, but they do not pay that much attention to what happens to people after that. So
Exactly.
you do need to provide some kind of future if you want the art to continue.
Legacy is
Yeah.
very important to me, that we give them something to carry on with,
You've been telling to different continents, Liz, right? You've been doing
5,
things here. 5
5,
continents. Oh,
five
tell us
continents.
about it. Do tell.
Where have I gone? I've been very lucky. I've done a lot of work in America. I first told stories in America in 1996. That's a long time ago, at the International Storytelling Center, the National Storytelling Festival. So I've told in 29 states. When I was a librarian, I went to Australia in 1987, 1989, and I studied children's libraries in New South Wales. So I've been to Australia several times, to Singapore, I've been to South Africa, been to Russia, been to Monaco, been to Israel, been to Austria, lots and lots of places. But I don't say that to be impressive, just to show that storytelling is the original World Wide Web. We're connected through stories, and we have a very strong storytelling family through the world. So, as you know, I own a hostel here, so quite often storytellers will pass through. I mean, I have 3 staying here at the minute. They come and they stay, and we share stories, we talk. That's how I love telling around the kitchen table. That's one. I'm sure you remember that yourself, Despina. My barn kitchen table has heard lots and lots of stories.
I've been telling Liz, Simona, that what she has is not a hostel, it is a storytelling shelter, actually,
We take in.
for
My
stray
daughter says
storytellers.
my daughter says that when I'm old, she's going to turn the place into a rest home for old storytellers, and we can bore each
Ah,
other
there you
silly,
go.
telling the same stories over and over again.
But people in that age forget, so it will always be a new story.
Exactly. Well, that's one of the best aspects of my work. As you know, I tell stories for everything from tiny children to people, the oldest 103. And one thing where I've done an awful lot of work is work with older people and people living with dementia. I mean, many of the people living with dementia are younger than me. And it was quite amazing to me during lockdown how we could work with people with dementia via Zoom. And it actually worked really well for them because they were in their own homes. Sometimes when you bring them out to a centre or even to here, they're not sure where they are. They're a bit anxious. Whereas they were sitting on their own sofas at home and we were telling them stories direct as I'm talking to you now. And that was terrific. It was really terrific. All right, some people fell asleep. That's okay. It happens. But it was a really good way of doing it. I've just done a report or a case study about that, about the value, the impact of telling stories to people with memory loss, because a song, a poem can trigger a memory, and it's magical. I love doing that.
People who have dementia, speaking from my own experience with my mother,
Mm.
tend to keep memories of their early childhood, so it wakes up stuff in their brain.
Well,
And
the training, yeah, we got training for it, and the analogy they use is of a bookshelf. If you have a new bookshelf, you start filling it up from the bottom to the top. And when things get shaky, what falls out first is the top, i.e., the more recent stuff. And what stays are the bottom shelves, the school days, family, first job, those things. And that's why they retain that information. I find it
So if
really
stories connect to their past from back then, they
yes.
will sound familiar. And it's a
Yeah.
very good idea what you said about Zoom and people being in their homes, not
Mm-hmm.
leaving their private space.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent idea indeed. It could work. It could work even better, I mean.
It works because, well, we had the support of a charity who went in and set up laptops and made sure relatives knew how to switch things on and that sort of thing. So you need it. It's like I was told years ago when talking to children, you have a child and a book. It's like a matchbox and a match. You need somebody to do the spark to get the thing going. You need an adult for that. And same with person with dementia, you need the person, a carer, and you need to make the spark between the two.
That's a great analogy.
Well, you were that person, you know that. It's very important.
Yeah. So do you think we could have another story maybe now? Story that, well, anything you like or could be important to you for any
Well,
reason?
yeah. Okay, because it's very snowy outside, I don't know where people are listening to this, if they'll be in somewhere warm, but I'm looking out at my car, which has got about 6 inches of snow. I'm going to have to clear it. So here's a story for you. Long ago in Ireland, young men and young women would go and be hired out for 6 months at a time. They would have to go and work for a farmer, perhaps. They wouldn't get any money until they'd done their 6 months, so they had to stay. My story is about a family from Donegal that had 6 children, all little girls, just a year apart. We call it like steps and stairs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when the oldest girl, Moya, was just about 8 years old, and the baby only a babe in arms, their father died of consumption, TB as we call it now. The young woman tried to keep the farm going, but when Moya got old enough to go and work out, she had to go to the hiring fair with a bundle under her arm and wait for a farmer to come and hire her. And sure enough, a farmer and his wife put her up in a cart, took her way to West Donegal, far from home, and brought her into their farmhouse. It was a traditional, long, low Irish thatched cottage, but there was a little step ladder into what's called a half loft, where there was a tiny room with a chair and a bed, but because she'd shared with her little sisters, to have a room of her own, even tiny, was just wonderful for her. There was a window that looked down into the yard. Now, she hadn't been there long till she realised the woman of the house was very kind, showed her how to do all the jobs. But the man of the house was bad-tempered, heavy-handed. He would come home and with drink taken, and he'd be rude to his wife. He'd lift his hand to her and to the girl. And the two women had to walk on eggshells, trying not to get the man angry. Moya kept her head down, she did her work. But coming up to Christmas, this time of the year, a big snowstorm had blown in. The woman of the house had been out doing shopping. She wasn't home. The man of the house wasn't back from his work. And so when the supper was ready on the table, neither master nor mistress were there. Moya covered up the food, banked up the fire for the night, went upstairs, up the steps to bed. But she'd only been lying in bed for about half an hour when she heard the downstairs door crash open, the man of the house shouting and roaring, "Where's the woman of this house? What sort of a house is this? No food for a hungry man." And she heard him stumbling. She knew he was drunk. She heard him coming towards the steps to her room, and she knew, even though she was an innocent girl, she knew she wasn't safe. So she opened the window and jumped down into the snow, wearing her long white nightdress, in her bare feet, running blindly, not knowing where she was going. All of a sudden, she was snatched off the ground by a man on a horse who put a cloak around her and said kindly, "Don't worry, child, you're safe with me." And whether it was his voice, the movement of the horse, or her own heart thumping, she set her head to his chest and fell asleep, just like a baby. When she opened her eyes, it was daylight. She felt herself being lifted off the horse. When she turned round, horse and rider had vanished, and there in front of her were the two gateposts of her own family farm. She ran to the door and hammered on it, fell into her mother's open arms. "What happened to you, Moya? Where have you been? How did you get here?" Moya told the story just the way I'm telling you. Her mother listened. And she said, the man on the horse, Moya. Did you notice anything about his hand? Yes, mother, she said. He had a scar on the back of his hand, like a crescent moon. And her mother sighed and said, that, daughter dear, was your own dead father. That's my story. And why it's special is because it was told to me by an inspirational storyteller, a woman called Sheila Quigley from Derry. Sheila, when I met her, had just retired from teaching. And she was quite sad because she'd lost her audience. She told stories to classes. And I said, but you know, adults like stories as well. She said, adults? I only work with children. I said, no, no, no. So I brought her with me. And soon she was telling stories. She went to Scotland to tell stories. She went to Cape Clear to tell stories. She was a beautiful, modest storyteller, but we lost her quite a few years ago now. And that's in her memory, Sheila Quigley. May her memory be blessed, as my friend Shona Lee would say.
That story, Liz, is one of my favorites from the ones you tell. This always gives me the shudders in the end.
I like to do that. I was telling stories in Indianapolis years ago at the Hoosier Storytelling Festival, and a nun came to me and she said, I really liked your stories. And I said, thank you very much. She said, but everybody dies. Yeah, maybe the Irish are very close to, we're linked to death. And my colleague that I teach with, Stephen O'Hara, that's his particular interest, is stories about death and death customs. And he's done a wonderful thing on YouTube. It's called Were There Many at the Wake? For the Irish wake is a very important celebration of a life. We keep the people at home, we don't put them into funeral pyres, and people are buried here within 3 days. And so the family sit around and neighbours come and they drink tea and they eat cakes. And in the olden days, there used to be drink and wake games. So Stephen does a very good talk about that. So if people go onto YouTube, it's called Were There Many at the Wake? Because it's really important how many people were at the funeral. Everybody wants to know, was it a big funeral? Because the more people are there, and that's what was so sad about lockdown, where you could only have a funeral with like 12 people. And I spent my time standing along roadsides watching funeral hearses go past, because you couldn't actually go to the funeral. You had to distance yourself. And that was very hard for people who lost their friends. So Ireland, we try and celebrate lives at the wake and remember the person. And of course, that's when the stories are told, tell the stories about things that he did or she did. It's wonderful.
That's so nice. I must leave a note to myself. When I'm close to death, I should visit Ireland.
Yeah.
So I have a good wake and a big funeral with lots of people coming.
That's it. That's it. But I think it's a celebration of a life. As you may know, I'm doing a new piece at the minute called A Cloak of Wisdom with two other storytellers. It's about celebration of women's stories. And women used to play a very important part in the preparations for death. You had the local women who would, wash the bodies, prepare them, and so on. But we had also these people called the keeners. And the keeners were women who would come and make this unearthly, eerie cry to sort of draw the sadness out of the mourners. Because sometimes they can't cry, they can't express emotion. But when you hear the keening, it brings the sadness out and people are able to cry. But the church didn't like these keeners because they had great power. And gradually over the years, it was considered, pagan, it was considered old-fashioned.
Oh.
So we like to celebrate those in our Cloak of Wisdom.
We do have we used to have the same custom here. It was not the church who went against it because it was incorporated in the Christian law. But I think that as time passed, people just forget about these things. It used to be professional wailers at funerals who would do that to provoke the sentiment out of people, to help people mourn.
Liz, you mentioned Ireland's fascination with death, and I was wondering, do you tell any stories with banshees? Because the banshee is like the death warrant in Ireland, and it's specific about Ireland.
Well, I must tell you and I'll tell you listeners, when I was a child, the scariest movie I ever saw was a Disney film, which you can still watch, called Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And it stars Sean Connery with hair and a very bad Irish accent. But it's worth watching because it has lots of the Irish death stereotypes, like the banshee, the death coach, the puka horse. So it is worth watching, even if you laugh at Sean Connery's accent. But the Banshee, nowadays, when I go into a secondary school, as I was in a couple of weeks ago, I had 70 children. Have any of you ever heard of the Banshee? Yes, they've heard of the Banshee. Anybody know anybody who's ever heard it? The hands go up. Still the hands go up. My granny heard one before her mother died. My auntie said she heard one. My this. So I've been working on a new project with traveller children, Irish travellers. Used to be called gypsies. They don't want to be called gypsies. They're Irish travellers. And I was working with 50 children in a school, especially for travel children. And I brought them to the library. We brought 50 children, these children, so that was great. And then 2 weeks ago, they performed on the stage of the Mermaid Arts Centre telling stories. And one story they told is a story from their own culture, and they bring it right up to date. There's a family where the father had died and the mother had to get all these children out to school. And Johnny, the oldest boy, he loved his hair. His hair was very beautiful. He loved how he looked, and he would always have his hair combed. And one morning, they used to wake up to the rooster crowing, but the rooster had died. They slept in, and the mother said, and I love this bit, quick, quick, go to school. If you don't get to school, the social services will be on me. So obviously they were in trouble for not sending their children to school. So they ran on to school, and Johnny didn't get his hair combed. But on the way, what did he find lying on the ground but a comb? So he took the comb and he combed his hair beautifully, and all the girls thought he was lovely. And that was fine. When he came home, his sister said, we're going to tell mummy you picked up a comb. Shh, don't tell mummy. But that night, the wailing started outside. Johnny, I want my comb, Johnny. And of course, this was a shriek of the Banshee. They did it very scarily. I'm just giving you the fast version of the story. Anyway, the mother said, what's that? And the girl said, Johnny picked up a comb. And she said, what? That was a Banshee's comb. You shouldn't have picked up a comb. So they go to see the priest the next day, and he says, you're a very silly boy. And he gives them advice. So they go and they take the poker for the fire, and they put it into the fire for 3 days and 3 nights, so it's white hot. And they get one of his father's old coats. The father has died, and they put the poker up the sleeve and they clip the comb onto it, and they put it out through the door, and there's this scream and this yowl, and the poker gets snapped in two, and the comb is gone. And the mother took Johnny and shaved his hair after that, so he wouldn't have any trouble combing his hair. And the warning is, if you find a comb on the ground, never bring it home. So that was just what they told me. I mean, I've lots of traditional Banshee stories, but that was a sort of up-to-date version about a boy who loved his hair, you know. And these were two girls of about 12 who told that story between them. So people still tell Banshee stories. The Banshee is a white woman. She's got long hair. She shrieks. She cries. And if she cries, nothing's going to happen to you, but she's going to predict death in somebody in your family or your neighborhood. And if your name starts with Mac something or O something, which are very traditional Irish names, the chances are you'll hear a Banshee. My brother actually heard one when he was, my eldest brother was in the Air Force before I was born. I'm the youngest of a big family. And he was walking a girl called O'Hara home. He dropped her off. He's walking home and he saw this white thing jumping from tree to tree. And he started running because he knew he was Banshee. He started stripping off his big coat, his jacket, and he ran into the house, his eyes staring in his head. And he told my mother that he heard a Banshee. Of course, my mother, being English, didn't believe him. And the girl O'Hara's grandmother died that night. Until the day my brother died in his 80s, he totally believed that story, and he totally believed that he'd seen a Banshee. Who am I to argue with that? So we're very close to our culture. We're very close to these spirits. Where I live in the Glens, we believe very much in fairies. But as you probably know, Irish fairies aren't fluttery like Tinkerbell. They can be quite mean. They don't even like you talking about them. We talk about the good people or the other crowd, as Eddie Lennon talks about. So you wouldn't ever cut down a fairy tree. Somebody told a story last night, a really good story about cutting down 12 fairy trees and fairies coming to try and steal a baby. There's so many stories about what happens when you cut down a fairy tree. Some of you have probably seen Back to the Future film, and in that film there's a car called a DeLorean, a gull-winged car that opens up. And John DeLorean built his factory in Belfast to produce those cars. And in the building of that factory, they cut down a fairy tree. Everybody told him not to cut it down, cut it down. The factory failed. John DeLorean was bankrupt. His cars stopped production. People in Ireland say it's because he cut down a fairy tree. I rest my case.
Absolutely. Back to the banshees, just for people who are not familiar with it, it might sound like a weird spirit because it is connected to death, but you should know that to the Irish, it is not malevolent. It is like a family spirit that just,
She's warning
warns
you.
the
She's
family that
warning you.
death
She's
is
telling you.
coming.
Yeah, death is coming.
And there's no way out of it. It's going to happen. It's just like to get you ready for it.
That's right. Death and taxes. It's inevitable. She's sympathizing with the family.
Mm. And fairies, oh yeah, fairies, Irish fairies are the real stuff. They're certainly not Disney. So Liz, would you like to tell us what you're doing now? I think there's some kind of cooperation with a Scottish something. Would you like to explain to us what exactly that is?
Are you talking about what we did for Fest, for example? We got some funding, a thing called Four Nations for Northern Ireland,
Right.
Wales, England, and Scotland. And we Adverse Camber in England. We had the Village Storytellers in Glasgow. We had a group in Wales. We've got Tamer in Wales now, who's representing Wales, and ourselves, the Armstrong Trust. And we collaborate. We meet regularly. We tell each other what we're doing. There's no point in everybody doing their own thing and not sharing information. So I think that's really important. And then last year, we were privileged to host the Fest conference, which was great in Glasgow. So we all worked on that. The Village Storytellers were the hosts, and we all worked on it as well. So I totally commend cooperation. So obviously the Fest conference is going to be in Italy in 2025. Looking forward to going there. It should be quite lovely in June. So I totally recommend that people join Fest as organizations and attend events because they're doing a lot of good work with the Cassandra Project for young storytellers. And I think collaboration is the way forward. I would collaborate a lot with American storytellers. I'm a member of the National Storytelling Network. We've just produced a really good thing called the Producer's Guide. For anybody who organizes storytelling events anywhere in the world, this Producer's Guide is really good. It looks on care of tellers, organizing events, use of tech. It's really good, a good guide. National Storytelling Network, Producer's Guide. You can easily find it.
It's brilliant. And I love hearing a lot about this cooperation and collaboration between storytellers and groups of storytelling. Um, and Liz, I was wondering, did you create your own organization? Did you become part of an
Yeah,
organization?
I'm a founding member of Storytellers of Ireland. Storytellers of Ireland was a gathering of storytellers, and I'm still on the committee. I was chair, I was secretary, still on the committee. But the good thing about Storytellers of Ireland, it's north-south. It's not just Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland. We have two different jurisdictions, but one organization. There are no borders. There should be no more borders in storytelling. So that's a voluntary organization. But then I'm very fortunate in that a man called Roger Armstrong decided to set up a trust in memory of his parents. His parents, Peg and Jim, came to my storytelling event in mid-80s and liked it and decided they'd start their own storytelling. So they started Tullycornet Yarn Spinners 33 years ago. We actually had it last night, it's still running. 10 months of the year. It's fantastic for 33 years, every month. And last night was very cold and very icy, but we still had 22 people, which was a small crowd for us. But we bring in like really good performing storytellers, and then people from the audience can come up. So Roger has put his money into this. He went to London first as a young man to sell records from a stall, and he founded his own record company called Ace Records. He's retired now. He's sold his company and he puts his money into storytelling. He pays me 1 day a week for 6 years now. And we also got money to employ a full-time administrator because, as you probably know, sometimes storytellers aren't the best at doing their own administration. So she does the booking, she does the invoicing. Storytellers in Northern Ireland are very blessed to have Claire O'Neill working as our project officer. She also goes in search of funding. So we've done funding for work with elderly people, funding for work with children. One of our storytellers, Vicky, has a geodesic dome, which you bring children into, and she projects her story in animation and tells the story along with it using digital technology. So we're really fortunate in that we're able to do very innovative projects. And the Cook of Wisdom, the new thing I'm doing, it was funding from the Arts Council, helped us develop that project, and now we're touring that project. So it's very exciting, isn't it? It's really exciting.
It is, it is. So just to gather things up in a nutshell, we have talked about yarn spinners, we have talked about the Cloak of Wisdom, we have talked about the Producer's Guide, and Fest, like FEST, for people who want to look more into it. Is there anything else, anything I'm missing out on?
Well, the Armstrong Storytelling Trust page itself, armstory.org.uk, it'll show you all our projects, tell you a bit about our background, and we welcome, I mean, as you know, Desp and I am a contact point for anybody who wants to come to Ireland. We have quite a good network. Some people will be here, they'd maybe go to Galway, to Orla, McGovern, Nicole Blue, or down to Cork to see Maria Gillen, or Kilkenny to see Emer Burke, or the wonderful yarn festival run by Aoife Demo in Wicklow. So we have lots of storytelling events. The Storytellers of Ireland website, storytellersofIreland.net, I think, can't remember, or .org, can't remember, net, I think. It has lists all sorts of storytelling events in Ireland. Again, for
Awesome.
festivals, people always ask how to get to festivals. Festivals book who they want to book. Festivals don't book by people sending them information and telling them how wonderful they are. You know, we know who we want and we'll go to, I know it's a fact, you know, we know who we
Yeah,
want.
that's right.
We go out. I never book anybody unless I've heard them. Never.
Of course.
Don't care who tells me how
Makes
wonderful they
sense.
are or how many brochures you have or what a website you have. I need to hear people. And that's been one good thing about Zoom, because new storytellers who wouldn't have been heard, we wouldn't have met without Zoom and without, you know, you're getting to hear people from all around the world without having to pay them to fly in. And then if you want to pay somebody to fly in, well, you know who you want. You know, I think that's good.
So you do organize the Glens Festival, right? Speaking of festivals, would you like to tell us about it?
Well, the Glen Storytelling's about 13 years old now. I live in this beautiful part of the world. It started off to try and bring people in for tourism, to see the lovely part of the world, to hear our folklore. So it runs over a big wide area, about a 40-mile area, with events all down the coast. We do schools, we do nursing homes, and then we have public events. Usually it's about I think this year it's going to be 23rd to 25th of October and 25. It's usually that weekend before Halloween. And Halloween's very big in Ireland, so we don't conflict with that. And it used to be the ghosts and the glens, but now it's more general. And we get top storytellers coming, and yeah, it's fun. It's enjoyable, and we tried. This year we did a youth thing. I worked with the local primary school. We had the children telling stories, and that worked really well. We're going to do more of that because the hall was packed with parents, people who would never have come to a storytelling event because their children were telling stories, packed, and the children were good, and they weren't posy, they weren't over rehearsed, they were really natural children just getting up telling stories. It was great. So that's what I do every year. You can find details on the armstory.org.uk website.
And people who want to visit and want to come there and attend as audience should know that not only do things happen in different venues across Northern Ireland, there is also a lovely visit to one of the islands, right, Liz?
Oh, yes, we go to Rathlin Island. Well, there's two things. We go to Rathlin Island during my festival. People go up. It's an island off the coast of County Antrim. But then the big festival is the Cape Clear International Storytelling Festival. And I've been on the committee of that for 30 years. And that happens usually the first weekend, September. It's this year, I think it's the 3rd to the 5th of September. And again, we have internationally acclaimed storytellers come to that. So if you want storytelling on an island, Cape Clear International Storytelling Festival is good. But as well as that, our Rathlin Island as well in the north.
Well, what you would do, Liz, were you not timid?
Yes, I haven't been shy. I don't know what the world would have become. Yeah, that's right. But sometimes I think, maybe I should stop all this, but I enjoy it too much. Every day is different. You never know what you're going to do.
Well, why should you? Why should you if you're having a good time?
I am. Tomorrow we're having a workshop with the wonderful Maria Watton, who's over from England, and we've got some storytellers coming for that. So that should be really lovely. It should be good.
Great. Anything you'd like to ask, Simona?
I've got two questions actually. So
Good.
number one is, well, of course, Despina and I stirred the conversation in directions we were interested in. But is there anything that you'd like to tell us about that we haven't asked you about?
I
And the
think we've
second
covered
one,
a
if you
lot.
want to start thinking about it, is what would be your piece of advice, best piece of advice for storytellers around the world from your
Um,
experience?
right. There's nothing else. I think I've covered most things. What I would say is, well, I always say to new storytellers, don't give up the day job. I mean, you can't just decide I'm going to be a storyteller and just give up any source of income. That way it leads to poverty. So I always recommend people keeping on a day job and starting off doing a little. I also think apprenticeships and mentorship is very important. Spend time. You get people who have like 4 stories. Next thing, they have a brochure and a website, and they haven't really walked the walk. They haven't really had much experience. I mean, everybody has to start somewhere, but I like to start with people, maybe coming out with me, shadowing me, and then going on. I'm not the fount of all wisdom. There are many, many wonderful storytellers around the world. I had a great intern called Rochelle Dart, who's now calling herself Dart as a storyteller, and she's just done a lovely series, story and a series called Speak Stories with Adam Booth in America, and it was a reframing LGBT stories that she's working on. So people are doing very innovative work, pushing the boundaries. And so I commend you looking up Rachel Dart, or Dart as she's working. So I think no matter what your interest, I think we need to be more culturally diverse. We need to have storytellers from lots of different backgrounds and from lots of different viewpoints in terms of gender, ethnicity. I think that's really important. It can't all be sort of older white people like me. I think we need to have culturally diverse. We need to have young storytellers. We need to have people from different, giving different expressions, whether it's their gender or ethnicity.
Yeah, inclusion. That's the word, I think. Yeah, yeah, that's
It's very
awesome.
important.
It's absolutely an idea that needs to be promoted. But
Mhm.
other than that, Simona, what I think that people can get from Liz's experience and Liz's personality is not only the storytelling part, that a lot of people can do that, but Liz's specialty, I'd say, is building community. That is the best thing you can get out of this
Mhm.
interview.
I started on a PhD during lockdown, and my theme was sharing stories to build community. Sadly, then, as some of you know, I got cancer, which I'm fortunately free of now, but it sort of hit me very hard emotionally. And so I just had to stop and pause my PhD. I have written a memoir called Story Woman, which I hope to get out. It was to be a third of my PhD. Maybe if I get the memoir produced, it's written, I need to get it out there. Maybe then I'll restart the PhD, but that's spot on, Despina. That's what it's called, sharing stories to build community, because I believe
Yeah.
that's what storytelling should do. Shouldn't be an elitist thing
Yes.
where we're all performers. You have to build community.
Absolutely. And every year you share the news of your new scan. We all rejoice with you.
Yeah, I've been
So
very
would you?
public about it. Despina, I've been very public because I would work quite often with people in hospice or people who are suffering from cancer. And I never thought for one moment that I would get it. So when I was a child growing up, you wouldn't mention cancer. It was whispered in
Mm,
corners. Whereas now we have to be public, we have to talk about it, and we have to show positivity. So if there's one thing I've managed to do through this, though it's hard at times, is to keep positive. And we have other colleagues I know in the storytelling world going through treatment at the minute, people that you both know. And I think we have to just keep putting the positive message across. And that's been my, that I can speak to a lot of people. And I think that's very important. So we storytellers, I started by saying this, I'll say at the end, we have a privileged position, but we also, I feel, have a responsibility to our listeners and most of all to our community.
yeah, great. Liz, this has been amazing. I mean, we've talked about so many interesting things. Do you have maybe a wish story you can, finish this with?
A long time ago, when the world was new, everything got a colour. The sky was blue, the grass was green, the soil was brown. But the snow had no colour. When the snow came down, everybody said, rain, rain, rain. Does it ever do anything except rain in this country? And the snow said, no, no, I'm not the rain, I'm the snow. I need colour. Where can I get some? So he looked around and he saw the flowers. They had lots of colour. He said, excuse me, red rose, can I have some of your colour? Why? Well, if I was red, there'd be red on the trees and red. Just go away, said the rose. People see me, they think summer, they think warmth. Go away, you're making me cold. He looked around, he saw a beautiful yellow flower. Oh, a yellow daffodil. Can I have some of your colour? Why? Well, if I was yellow, there'd be yellow on the ground and yellow on the look, look, said the daffodil. Just go away. People see daffodils, they think spring has come, winter's over. Go away, you're making me cold. And he was just giving up when he saw a tiny little white flower. Excuse me, little flower, can I have some of your colour? Why? Well, if I was white, there'd be white in the trees and white in the hills. The whole world would look fresh. And the little flower nodded. When she nodded, some of the white came off and the snow came down white. Oh, the snow said, thank you so much. You're very kind. You've been kind to me. Let me be kind to you. From now on, no matter how cold it gets, the frost won't ever bite your petals. No matter how hard the ground gets, you'll always be the first tiny flower of the spring. And ever since then, that flower has been called the snowdrop. And if you look up under a snowdrop, you'll see a bit of green, and that's where she shook the colour off and gave it to the snow.
Oh, that was so sweet. I hate that the daffodil was the villain in this story, but I like daffodils.
Yeah, that's from one of my
Awesome.
books. My book is called Here, There, and Everywhere, Stories from Many Lands, and that's just one because when I grew up here, I never met anybody who wasn't from here. And now when I go into schools, there are children from many, many, many different nationalities. And so I think it's really important we tell folk tales from around the world. So that's a little one. And that I told the other day to pensioners, to older people, or I told it to tiny children. So it's one of those stories you can tell to anybody. Gardening clubs love that story. They like that one.
Indeed. Plus, there's always the inner child within us, no matter the age.
Exactly.
So wrapping things up, thank you very much for your time and your shared wisdom.
Pleasure.
This has been brilliant, right, Mona? I don't know. I had a very good
Thank you,
time.
Biz.
It's been a pleasure.